gonna throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. Coming at you on a Monday night, getting you ready for another week as we get closer and closer to the start of the college football season and the start of Carolina's season. 3 weeks from tonight is when Carolina will take on the TCU Horned Frogs, and we will be in Kenan Stadium for that game. Right about now, we would be in the middle of that game and hoping that we will be cheering loudly during that game. But we are still in preparation mode and getting you ready for the season. So we continue tonight with a preview of the defensive line. What do we expect out of this year's defensive line group? But this edition really focuses on the Hog Mollies altogether because Carolina with a severe injury to the offensive line. So we'll tell you about that. And then do have one other note for you guys on the way out of this edition of the podcast. That will pertain to an upcoming edition of the podcast. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye or sticking around for that. I can talk. I swear I can. But we start tonight's edition of the podcast talking about the injury to Austin Blaske because this is a big one, guys. Carolina loses what is, as we said when we talked about the offensive line, Carolina's most veteran guy and arguably the Carolina's best offensive lineman down with an injury, suffers a non-contact foot injury that is apparently a broken foot. This according to Adam Smith of Inside Carolina. He reported this last night. And so Carolina now in a little bit of a scramble mode to try to get ready for the season without their leader along the offensive line. Now, the good news is that in terms of leadership, you do have Christo Kelly at center, who has really seemed to step up since coming to Carolina. But, man, this is as significant of an injury as you're going to see. As Josh Marlowe was alongside me here for this edition of the podcast, this is as severe of an injury as you're going to see and as big of a blow that you could have thought for Carolina in the preseason because, even if they were to lose some of the guys along the offensive side of the ball, it feels like at just about every other position you could probably sustain it. This is an offensive line where, yes, you do have a lot of bodies, but this is also the biggest question on the offensive side of the ball for Carolina, and that's why I think it's probably the most concerning injury that you could have on that side.
Yeah, this wasn't immediate when we knew this news was coming down. It was probably multiple cuss words that followed that headline because of how good Blaske is, how important Blaske is. And I think, this coaching staff is going to be put to the test right away, trying to find a way to replace him. And, we've put a lot of stock in Belichick and this staff that he's put together, being able to coach guys up and really maximize the talent of this roster. And that's going to have to be the case among this offensive line with him now being injured. I guess, if there's any sort of good news, is that you still have 3 weeks to kind of figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this was, week of, a week out, you still be disappointed, you still be concerned, but the chances of really trying to find a legitimate replacement there and figuring out how you're going to reshuffle the offensive line becomes a lot harder. But now you've got 3 weeks. Time is a benefit. This is where playing on that Monday night maybe can really come to the benefit of Carolina. They have 2 extra days to prepare as opposed to playing on Saturday or like last year when you play on that Thursday. So, I hate it for him. The good news is that, he will be able to return this season. But, this is why we talk all preseason every single year about developing depth among the trenches, because, of any position group, that's where injuries are going to strike. And unfortunately, it struck Carolina before we got into the actual flow of the season. And they have their work cut out for them trying to replace their best offensive lineman from a year ago.
Yeah, that's going to be the thing is that, I do think that it is possible. We talked about Daniel King being one of the best guys that Carolina picked up out of the transfer portal. And I do think that Daniel King is a guy that can still be very successful for Carolina in this role. But you're talking about losing a guy that last year did not allow a sack, allowed 5 quarterback pressures the entire season. And now you're not going to have that along your offensive line. That was the guy that was taking over for Willie Lampkin, who was arguably your best offensive lineman last season. So he was really going to anchor this group, and I think just gave you a feeling of confidence that this group would actually be pretty solid this year. I mean, as a run blocker, I thought he was really good as well. And so now Carolina is in a little bit of scramble mode, but this is probably one of the best positions that they could have had this happen at, either of the guard spots, because you've got King who can slide in there. And so I think they'll probably be okay. But the thing is that, you're hoping that you can get him back sooner rather than later, because I had it envisioned in my mind. And I know that maybe some people would say he couldn't play the tackle spots at the Power 5 level. Maybe he was just a guy that played it at the Group of 5 level. But now that he comes up to the Power 4 level, rather, maybe he was a guy that would just transition and be fully on the inside at guard. I envisioned him as a guy that could help you at tackle if Trevion Green or Miles McVay struggled. Now you're going to need him on the interior of that unit for the first 4 games of the season. And that's at the best. That's the best timeline that they have, is that he is back for the game against Clemson. There's no guarantee that happens. So a heavy dose of Daniel King probably coming up here. Chad Lindbergh, also a guy that apparently is a name to watch there at the position as well.
Yeah, and they're going to need King to play like one on the field to really minimize Blaske's injury. And you're right. Like this is an injury that, while on the surface, because you have King on the roster behind with depth, you feel somewhat confident that they can replace it from the interior guard perspective. But it does have further ramifications for what you can maybe do at tackle. If you were to suffer an injury, or B, if you just weren't getting the type of production primarily from Trevion Green's the guy we've really focused in on as maybe a guy that King could maybe step out there and play for him if it ever got to that. So that's the domino effect of injuries among the offensive line play. And so, it's not something that we're not used to hearing being talked about. Want to create and wanting to establish depth among that position group is something that has failed Carolina the past couple of years. And now that's going to be put to the test, because if Carolina can, hold up the first 4 games with Blaske injured, and I don't know what that looks like from a record perspective. Let's just say Carolina's 3-1. Yeah, if they're 4-0, I think we'd all be jumping for joy. But that would be a real sign of internal growth and development, and a sign that this coaching staff is doing what Mac Brown's coach staff can never do, which is get the most out of that room. And so good thing that they did what they did in the offseason and the portal, revamping the offensive line the way that they did, adding talent, adding depth to that position group. because as we've seen before we even snapped the first play of the season, it's going to be needed to put to the test if this offensive line is going to hold up its end of the bargain.
Yeah, and when you look at King, you look at last year for him, posted into 76.5 run blocking grade, a 79.6 pass blocking grade, and a 75.8 overall grade, while allowing just 1 sack and 10 total quarterback pressures, on his way to earning all Sun Belt honors. Played 360 snaps at the right guard position that he is going to have to play, or you would presume is going to have to play for Carolina. 429 of his 789 snaps came at the right tackle position. But this is a guy that's comfortable with playing that position, and I really think is going to make this an easier transition for Carolina. Now, the problem is that leadership-wise, how does everything carry over? Is there going to be enough leadership from a guy like Christo Kelly, or do you need someone else that can step up on that line? This also puts a lot of pressure on Aiden Banfield, because if Aiden Banfield was a guy that was struggling out of the gate to begin the season, you had Daniel King that could rotate in for him. Now it's on Banfield to take that next step and to do it early in the season. So this offensive line, it seems like it's in a pretty good spot. This is why you went out and got all these guys. But now with your one of your top guys gone, arguably your best guy gone, how do you handle it to start the season with 2 matchups against teams that are in the Big 12 that could provide some sturdy test for you, and then 2 teams that you should be able to beat regardless of what happens, regardless of who is out there on the field? All right, let's move over to the defensive line and let's talk about the guys that are there this year. And when we talk about the defensive line, it is really simple. It starts with one guy and one guy only, and that is Price Yates, who will be coming off the edge for Carolina, or at least a defensive end spot for the team this season. You go back to last year for him, only saw limited action because of an offseason injury, but still tallied 21 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, and 14 total quarterback pressures in just 340 snaps across 7 games. Of course, Carolina fans should remember him. He was the guy that went off in the game against Carolina in the bowl game, the Fenway Bowl, where he collected 6 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack. It was just a dominant performance. Carolina clearly at that time said, hey, we got to find a way to get this kid to campus, and they did just that. You look at his career as a whole. You go back to 2023 when he was fully healthy and they moved him to that strong side defensive end spot out of a defensive tackle spot. He had 42 total tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, and 30 total quarterback pressures across 12 games. That's the type of production that I think Carolina is expecting out of him this season. And if they can get that type of production from him, you feel pretty good about where this group will be at, even though they don't have the amount of sacks or pressures that you got from a guy like Kamen Rucker during his time when he was healthy.
Yeah, I think it was very evident why Belichick, Michael Lombardi, and this staff targeted him in the portal, because when they were probably doing some film evaluation, they saw him kicking a lot of people's asses that are going to be on this roster for the upcoming season. And, you really would have thought, man, this would be a really great person to have alongside Bo Atkinson on the defensive line, but that was not meant to be. Bo Atkinson went into the portal and go on somewhere else. But, he is going to be the engine that drives what this defensive line does in 2025. I think, as we dive deeper into the defensive side of the football, I kind of like what Carolina did at linebacker. I think with Thaddeus Dixon in the cornerback room, you probably feel much better about that back 7 than you have maybe in years past. But as we know with the game of football, it doesn't matter how good your back 7 is if your front 4 cannot do the job of putting pressure on the quarterback and making plays in the run game. He can do both. And this is a guy that I think with just the way he plays will make it easy to root for him, because he plays with his hair on fire. He plays with relentless energy and effort. And I think, that's something that really attracted him to this coaching staff. And so I'm really excited to see what he does in Carolina blue, because after seeing him in UConn blue, he kind of has you salivating at the mouth, because, this is a guy capable of being a difference maker every Saturday he's on the football field.
I definitely thought that you were going to say you wanted to see him in Carolina blue after he was in UConn blue and made you feel blue during the bowl game. But he definitely is the type of guy that I think Carolina's looking for along the defensive line. Very physical, a bull rusher type of mentality to him. Definitely a guy that, knows how to get off of blocks up front, does it pretty consistently, and is able to make plays in the backfield. And if he can replicate that 2023 season, which to me, there's no reasons to suggest that he won't be able to do that. I mean, he had close to half that production last year, was actually, a little bit more productive from a sack perspective last year in 7 games. You would imagine that span that out over 12 games, 13 games. I think then you're talking about a guy that could put up very similar numbers or better numbers than what he did in that 2023 season. And if you can get that for Carolina, that's really that's ultimately a great stepping stone for the rest of this defensive line. And that's really what they're looking for, because the rest of the unit really doesn't have a lot of guys who have played consistent minutes or consistent snaps, rather, still in the basketball mindset, here at the college level. You got Smith Vilbert, who is the most experienced option. At this point, I thought coming into the fall, there might be a little bit of a battle for that other edge rusher spot. There is not. Smith Vilbert is going to be your guy. And, I think when you turn on the film of him and you watch him, there are a lot more things to like about what he does. But you look back, this past year at the college level, he played the most snaps that he's played, 339. And in those snaps, he collected 12 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack and a half. Those are solid numbers. But the fact that this is a guy that's never played more than 339 snaps in a season, that means that while he is a guy that might look like a veteran, with the, senior being a part of the senior class, he's still a guy that is pretty raw and still, has some talent that's there. The question is Carolina going to be the ones that are able to unlock that this season?
Yeah, this definitely feels like a Belichick guy, that he saw something that maybe where no one else has seen in him, and in the scheme and what they're going to ask him to do can unlock more production than what we've seen so far from him in his college career. It'd be hard to be disappointed if he kind of replicated that production, but I think Carolina needs more if they're wanting to take the step forward they need to take as a defense. I think what we expect them to take as a defense with just what comes with the nature of being coached by Bill Belichick and his son. So be interested to really see, to me, this feels like a guy that will not be at his best against TCU. I think this will be a guy that, when we get back in the Clemson game, we'll see, has he taken a step forward? And then when you get down to the back end of the season, is he really playing at a high level? And if Carolina can do that with this new look, this revamped defensive line, then maybe they got a chance to maybe be the defensive line unit that they haven't been down the stretch the past couple seasons. Because I think that's going to be the big thing with this trench group. Same thing we talked about with the offensive side of the football. They didn't have an issue getting off to good starts. You go back 2 years ago against South Carolina, what they did in that season opener, what they did the first 3 games last year, where it felt like maybe under Jeff Collins, they were really primed and ready to be a consistent unit, and then it all tapered off. Belichick's aware of that. And so you got to get more consistent production throughout the season. I think this will be a guy that, assuming that this coaching staff has not lost its fastball, this will be a guy that I think will get better the more snaps he plays and the longer the season moves along.
Yeah, in defense of Vilbert, I think the one thing that you have to give to him is that when you look at the guys that he was around at Penn State, who are you playing him over? You're not playing him over anybody. What are you going to play him over Abdul Carter? Abdul Carter's one of the most talented edge rushers. And I know people are going to say, well, you're saying this because you're a Giants fan. But just look at what he did in his first preseason game. Like, that dude's already validating the fact that he was selected number 3 overall and that he could be one of the better edge rushers in all of football for years to come. that's really difficult for Smith Vilber to have to overshadow him and get on the field. But the thing I will say is when you go back and you watch his highlight tape last year, I thought the moments when he was on the field, he made the most of them. And there's a lot to like about what he does. I think his release off the line of scrimmage is really, really good. I think that's going to give some tackles some issues. I think he does a really good job of getting low and getting around guys. I really think there is a lot to his game that you will really like. My thing is how much production is he going to be able to get out of it? Is he going to be a guy that is going to be able to get, maybe even just similar production to what we saw last year from Price Yates, maybe a little bit more than that? If he could give you that, then I think you're feeling pretty good. If he could double the numbers that he had at Penn State, 3 sacks, probably a little bit more than that you'd like. But I do think that there is a pathway for him to be successful this year. The thing is that, for him, it's just a matter of, was he a guy that was being held back because there were so many great talents at Penn State, or was he a guy that really wasn't nearly as talented as those guys, and really it doesn't have that production capability for him at the college level? We'll have to wait and see on that. Now you go to the interior of the defensive line, because it feels like the one thing that we know is that basically this group is set. It looks like we've got the starters for this group. In the middle at nose tackle, looks like it's going to be East Carolina transfer CJ Mims. This is a guy that, again, one of the more experienced guys on the line, but this is going to be the first time in his career that he will be a full-time starter. Last year, in 339 snaps, finished with 23 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, a sack and a half, 8 quarterback pressures, and a forced fumble. Very solid production. But again, is he a guy that is capable of sort of doubling those types of numbers this year in Carolina's system, where he'll be playing a little bit of a different role? He's put on the weight, and now he's going to be playing that nose tackle spot. Carolina's hoping he's a guy that's going to be able to help them in the run game and allow them to slow down the run a little bit more consistently than they were able to do last year.
Yeah, and he's also making the jump from the group of 5 level to the power conference level. With that comes just a different level of physicality that he's not used to seeing. But I think the biggest thing that you have to like is that he put the weight on. And so he's, that's the first sign, I guess, is being unselfish, is being asked to come in here, play a different role than what you're used to playing. With that, you've got to change your body. And he did that over the offseason. And I think this is going to be a guy that I think it's going to be really fun to see him kind of operate in the middle of that defense. As you mentioned there at that nose position, can he be a guy that can he take on blockers and really be able to plug gaps and holes and let these linebackers get downhill and make plays? Can he do that on a consistent basis? Can he win his one-on-one battles to make the job easier for the guys behind him? So if I remember correctly, when he transferred in, there was a little bit of buzz and excitement about him as a player. I think I remember this fan base getting a little bit excited about him. I don't know why, because I don't watch ECU football enough to get excited about any of their players outside when they beat NC State in the bowl game, hopefully beat NC State in their season opener. But nonetheless, I think there's a nice energy, a nice buzz around him. I think it's a good thing for him that he knows kind of 3 weeks out that he's going to be a starter. He knows what the role is going to be, what's going to be expected of him. And it's going to be, I think, pretty cool to see what he does there in the middle of this 3-4 defense. So really excited to see what CJ Mims is doing. And that's me being as optimistic as I can be, because it's really hard to give praise to a program like ECU that's kicked my ass and most of my years as a Carolina football fan.
Well, don't worry. You'll get comfortable with it on the defensive side of the football, because Gavin Gibson is also a starting nickelback for the team. So he will be another guy that we will be talking about at some point. I mean, look, the thing with CJ Mims is it's always tough when you have to put on weight and you have to play a different position. So for him, I think –
Speak for yourself. I have no problem putting on weight.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, we can put on the weight pretty easily. If you need part of our nutrition plan, and you will. No, I watched the video that Carolina put up earlier today. trust me, them boys are eating very, very well and eating the way that they are supposed to. But I mean, look, with CJ Mims, I think the biggest thing is just coming in here and finding a way to be consistent as the year goes along. I don't expect him to be a guy that's going to be perfect out of the gate. But as the season goes along, can you be a guy that can help this team consistently slow down the run in those A and B gaps? If you can be that guy, then I think that's what Carolina's looking for, because we haven't had a consistent force in there. And maybe he's a guy that can get after the quarterback as well. I'm looking more towards his partner, who we'll talk about here in just a second, along the defensive line as that guy. But you never really know. That's what you are hoping for out of those positions, because in years past, this is the thing. Carolina's had the talent at these positions. They've had Jabari Ritzie. They've had Travis Shaw. They've had other guys at this position that you feel really good about when you first land them. And then when they get here and they actually get on the field, it never really translates. I mean, you talked last year about how fast of a start Carolina's defensive line got off to. Well, it was really Jabari Ritzie. He got off to a great start, was getting after the quarterback, and then that disappeared as the year went along, and there was nowhere else where he was noticeable. He was not a guy that was able to slow down the run, and he wasn't able to create consistent pass rush, and so he became a guy that was relatively ineffective, and Carolina had to go with a rotation there. Now, they still are going to have to rotate guys at this position, but you're just looking for someone that's a consistent threat, that you know what they bring to the table. They're going to bring it every single week, and hopefully CJ Mims is a guy that can help Carolina stop the run. Now, DeAndre Robinson, that's the guy that I think is going to be able to rush the passer a little bit. We saw it a little bit with him last year. Now, don't get it wrong. DeAndre Robinson's a big dude himself. But you look at what he did a year ago, played 162 snaps on defense and finished with 17 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and 2 quarterback hurries. You go back to his time at the high school level, he had 168 total tackles in his final 2 years, 37 tackles for loss, and 19 sacks. So this was a dude that was able to get after the quarterback. I love the physicality. I watched his high school film. He really stands out as a physical beast, just a guy that is going to win with bull rush tendencies all the time, because he's just going to simply overpower you. And that's what Carolina needs. They need a bully along their defensive line, and that's what DeAndre Robinson looks like. Now, is it going to translate immediately? Is he going to be a guy that comes in and is consistent right out of the gate and Carolina can count on him week to week? That I don't know, and that's part of the issue with the group of guys that Carolina has. But I do think that, especially as the season goes along, for this young sophomore who was just a true freshman last year, he is going to grow into one of the more exciting players to watch along this defensive front. Yeah,
it's hard to watch what he did in high school and not get excited about his potential, right? Because this is just a menace that not only there's people that invite physicality, and then there's people that seek out physicality. He wants to put a hat on somebody. He wants to put someone on their rump, and I think there's a meanness to him that you can appreciate. There's a mean streak in him where when he walks in that line of competition, it's no longer Mr. Nice Guy. I'm here to dominate. And I think Carolina could use that kind of attitude in that defensive line. And I think what you really got to appreciate is he also does it at the size that he is. And make no mistake about it. Like you mentioned the video that Carolina put up and how these guys are eating right. Like Belichick's talked a lot about getting these guys' bodies right and really making them make sure they're ready to perform at a high level. And I think it's something that, the casual fan maybe doesn't pay a lot of attention to, but when you hear football people talk about, the program, they always talk about the most important hire is your strength and conditioning coach. And then, what they do from a nutrition level. And this is a guy whose body I think is going to be really fascinating because there's a large mass of a human being there, but he's quick, he's fast, he's strong. He can get off at the line of scrimmage. He can get off a block and make a tackle. And that's all it's going to be appreciated. I think this is a guy, maybe as much as anyone among the defensive line, that if he can be in Carolina blue for the entire time that the Belichicks are in Chapel Hill, gaming up the defense. This could be a guy that could really kind of climb the ladder for one of the better defensive linemen we've had here in recent memory, because I think there's a potential for him to be an all ACC caliber player down the line.
Yeah, and I mean, it could come to fruition this year. We're just going to have to wait and see. Is he a guy that, really translates that quickly? The good thing about him is he's coming down from a Power 5 school. So I think that's one thing that we shouldn't really be questioning. We know that he's going to be ready to play at this level, and he was actually pretty good last year. I think what he looked at was that he may not have been a starter this year at Florida. And so he said, look, I want to be a starter this year. I feel like I'm good enough. Let me go to North Carolina and see whether or not this is a good fit. And I think, we talked about it. Carolina really needed guys along this defensive line that could be impact players. This was one of the gems that fell into their hands, and they got their hands on him. And I think now there's a chance for him to turn into one of the better defensive linemen, as you said, that Carolina's had in recent memory. It's just all about, does he bring the right mindset to the table, something that the guys under the previous staff were not able to necessarily do. Well, the defensive tackle rotation also pretty solid, because you got Arizona transfer Isaiah Johnson. Johnson spent the last 3 years in Tucson with the Arizona Wildcats, played in 12 games and started 3 of those over 3 years. This past year played 170 snaps and compiled 9 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. This is a guy that I don't think the expectations are through the roof for him. But the thing is that he's got experience at the power conference level. He's been playing for a couple of years there now. And the hope is that giving him an expanded role, very similar to what we did with what we're going to do with Smith Vilbert, will unlock some of his potential. I think that he is a guy that is sort of a question mark coming into this season, but could be a huge piece for Carolina along that defensive front this year as a rotational piece.
Yeah, I think you got to like the fact that 3 years at the power conference level, so he's used to the physicality. He won't be, jarred by it when he gets, whether it's a TCU game or some of the other games that Carolina will play this year. And I think when you look at the way that this roster got put together, there were some places where Carolina went the group of 5 route. But I don't think it's by accident. You look at some of these guys we talked about on the defensive line, that they're coming from the power conference level. You got a guy from Florida here. You got a guy from Penn State here. Now you got a guy from Arizona here as well. I don't think that's by accident. I think that was something that Belichick identified and said, hey, it's much easier, I think, to teach physicality on the offensive side of the football as opposed to the defensive side of the ball. And I think this is a guy that if he replicates the production, you won't be disappointed with that. But is there more in the tank? Is there something there that we did not see Arizona be able to find? And could he maybe be a guy, like, if he doubles that production, that does wonders for Carolina? The big issue that they've had the past couple of years is that whenever they put their rotation guys in, there was a noticeable drop-off in production. And these guys were not getting off blocks. They were not getting to the pass rush. We're not getting to the quarterback. I think that's something that Belichick's wanting to change, because I think they're going to play guys more often than what we're used to seeing. There's going to be a much more, I don't say a healthier rotation, but a much more consistent rotation. But you can only rotate guys in if you're not seeing a drop-off in production. And so I think this is a guy that, what his floor is, and that floor isn't bad. But can you maybe upgrade it to a nice hardwood floor as opposed to a cheap linoleum from Lowe's and get double production? And if that's the case, it really helps this defensive line be the unit that it has to be for this defense to take the step we're not only asking for or begging for. I mean, dude, I'm now praying for this defense to take a step forward, and it starts up front with the hog mollies on the defensive line.
Yeah, and one guy that could also factor in there, a guy that seems like he's starting to get more respect from the staff, and they're starting to trust him as a part of this defensive line this year, is Leroy Jackson. He talked to the media last week. I think if they're putting you up to talk to the media, that's showing that you are taking the steps that are necessary to be a part of whatever room you are in. And I think that's what you're looking at with Leroy Jackson. Is he going to be a guy that probably starts the year for Carolina as a starter? No. But as the year goes along, if one of the guys isn't performing up front, could that be a guy that eventually develops into a piece for Carolina that they can at least rotate in? I think that certainly is the case. I thought Peter Pisanski was going to be the guy out of the two holdovers that was going to be able to make more noise, because Pisanski was the guy that coming out of high school was a little more highly touted. But it seems like Leroy Jackson is the guy that's been putting in that work. And now he's a guy that seems to be gaining the trust of the staff. And that is something that cannot be discounted when it comes to getting one of these rotational spots. So I expect that he's going to be a part of what Carolina does moving forward, and it could be immediately out of the gate.
Yeah, I'm with you. If Belichick is sending you to the podium, I don't think it's by accident. Now, this is Belichick, and it could just be a way of him, blowing smoke up our glutes and just, sending in just any random person up there to talk. But it doesn't feel that way. I expect him to play, I guess, a significant role in the opener against TCU, and then kind of see where it goes from there. If he's half the player and real person that he is on NCAA Football 26, we're going to be in good hands, because I kicked ass with him on the video game. So, I think we were always going to be inquisitive about what the holdovers, what would their role be? Could they emerge, or were these guys that would get buried on the depth chart? Like, were these just guys that Belichick kept because you got to keep so many guys just to have some ones to hit in practice? It doesn't feel like that's the case with Leroy Jackson, and I think he's a guy that is poised to at least start the season out with the role as a rotation guy among Carolina's defensive line, and it gives him a chance to kind of build up with this new coaching staff.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, I mean, for him, like Johnson being a guy that hasn't necessarily produced, DeAndre Robinson, a guy that's early in his career still, there is opportunity here. And I mean, even with CJ Mims, a guy that hasn't been a full-time starter, there is opportunities that are available for him, and there are going to be reps that are going to be available for him. And so I think so far it seems like he's taken advantage of those, and hopefully that carries into the season. You go to the group of edge rushers that Carolina has. Really, the reason why I'm looking at this is guys that, could potentially be rotational pieces. Hell, I don't even know what this defensive front is actually going to look like for Carolina in the opener. So who knows? He could be a guy that has a pretty significant role. I think you got to start with Tyler Thompson, one of the guys that's a holdover from last year. 148 snaps a year ago, including 2 starts for the team. But he had just 5 total tackles a year ago, did not have a tackle for loss or a sack. This is a guy that I think, redshirt freshman a year ago was still very light in the keister. I think they've put on a little bit more weight for him this offseason. I think he's a guy that, believe it or not, we're not really talking a whole lot about him. We're talking more about the transfers with Vilbert. We'll get to McCoy here in just a second, that Carolina got out of the transfer portal from Penn State as well. But this is a guy that's a holdover on this roster. There are few of them. There are very few of them, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But this is one of the guys that I really do think could make an impact this year, now that he has a little bit more weight on him and is in his 3rd year in the system.
Yeah, I think that's something that you look at and say, I think he's poised, because I think his body's ready to be a difference maker on Saturday. And this is going to be, I think, a guy that we can identify that, okay, he stayed, could have left, but, obviously was valued enough to play for Bill Belichick and his son. And then with what they're able to do with his body, that sounds kind of weird saying that out loud. But,
when we're talking offensive and defensive lines, we're talking bodies and butts. We're talking everything.
But, I think he's another guy that I think will benefit in a change in philosophy and a change of how he's getting prepared to play, and then what he's going to be asked to do on Saturday. I don't know what the production's going to be. I don't want to set the bar too high, but can you go in there and can you make a difference? Can you make a play or two whenever you're being called upon? And I think that's kind of something that Belichick has preached is about all these guys being ready to play. And I had a chance this morning. We had Brent Renner on the morning show at WFNZ, and he talked about just the professional attitude that's already been established. There are 11 days into camp. There are 9 days into camp. I remember exactly which one it is, but he said, he was at practice last week, and he said it's noticeable. It's not something that we're just talking about. When you go to practice, you can feel that. Is this a guy that being in a much more professional environment with what's being asked, required, and demanded, is going to bring the best out of him? And maybe he becomes a guy that Carolina is counting on more than maybe we initially thought when he decided to not transfer out of the program and Mac Brown got fired and Bill Belichick got hired.
Yeah, and when I said 3 years in the system, I meant more 3 years in the college system, putting more weight on his body. But I think this could also be a system that, is being brought in by Stephen Belichick. This scheme, I think, could work better towards what he's looking to do. And I think that was the thing, was that Carolina wanted these smaller edge rushers when they brought them in out of the high school level. And it seemed like that was something that they valued, was bringing in these quicker edge rushers that could get after the quarterback. Well, the thing is that just didn't really translate. I wonder now, being in a system where physicality is demanded, physicality is the name of the game. I mean, I asked Thaddeus Dixon about it. That was the first thing that he said. And he said that even back in June when the media talked to him, the first thing that he brought up was being physical. I wonder if this offseason, the change in mindset, if that's really paid off for a guy like a Tyler Thompson, and if that is something that could allow him to succeed more this year. Now, he's going to have a battle on his hands with a couple other guys that could be playing the same position as him. They might be playing a little bit of a different position. We'll have to just wait and see until they actually take the field and see what this defensive lineup looks like. Joseph McCoy, the transfer from Penn State that I talked about, so far, in his career, played in just 2 games over the last 2 seasons. So he's going to come in as a sophomore with 3 years of eligibility left. He's played just 4 snaps, had 1 total tackle. But you go back to 2022 in his senior year of high school, 54 total tackles, 26 tackles for loss, and 14 sacks as a senior. So there is a lot of potential here. That type of production has been there at one point in his career. And this really goes back to some of the guys that I was talking about with Carolina. His body is a little bit different. He's built a little bit different than those guys. But those guys were players who put up huge numbers in high school. Malachi Hamrick, Curtis Simpson. I mean, they put up massive numbers at the high school level. Now you wonder, can McCoy be the guy that put up massive numbers at the high school level and that Belichick and his staff can get more out of than Mac Brown was able to get?
Certainly hope so, right? I think is that like our baseline expectation when it comes to Belichick and the guys that he held over from the Mac Brown era, is that you're going to get more out of these guys? Because I guess that's where I am, and maybe that's not fair to Mac, but I guess this is part of the territory when you hire an 8-time Super Bowl winning head coach who is maybe the best defensive mind the game of football has ever seen, and so I guess that's where I am for a lot of these dudes that stayed, that did not have big roles, but maybe are poised to take a step forward because you've got a new scheme. You've got a new system. You've got a new way of doing things. That there's talent and production there. Now it's just seeing it at the college level. And is he now poised to do so with what he's being asked to do now, as opposed to what he was being asked to do last year while playing for Mac Brown and Jeff Collins? So I think it's what makes this unit, I think, fun and very intriguing and very interesting. You've maybe got the guys that when they take the field against TCU, Mims, Yates, Dontre Robinson, maybe those are guys that you expect to be difference makers. But I think this room does offer for guys to kind of emerge as the season moves along, as these guys get comfortable and acclimated to playing for Belichick. And McCoy is, I think, a dude that if we look up and he's playing a rotational role when they go to Stanford, when they play Cal, when they play Virginia, I don't think we would be surprised. Whereas if he was probably playing for Mac Brown and he kind of came from the bottom of the depth chart all the way up to where he was playing, 10 to 15 snaps a game, that would probably be surprising just given that staff's inability to create legitimate depth among the roster.
Well, the good news for McCoy is he is not a guy that was on the roster last year. He was at Penn State. If I miscommunicated that, that's on me. But I still think he's a guy that you don't put up that type of production and it means nothing. Like when you're that productive at the high school level, and especially when you end up at Penn State, like you are a legitimate edge rusher. So to me, I think this is a guy, it just depends on, how long it takes. Is it going to be this year? Does a guy like Smith Vilbert really jump onto the scene and you don't necessarily need this young man? But I don't know. This could be a guy that Carolina looks at and says, no, we need you immediately. If they need him immediately, I think he's another guy that you look at and you say, was he in a system that just really didn't give him the opportunities out of the gate? Was that what was really holding him back because of all the guys that they have at Penn State? I think that certainly is something that could be at play here, but we'll just have to wait and see. Another guy that is in a similar position to him, but I do think, comes from a little bit of a different situation, but is going to be battling for rotational reps for Carolina is Delaware transfer Milcart Abu-Jauti. And he comes over from Delaware, as I mentioned, where last year he had 24 total tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks, along with 8 quarterback hits. He will, I think, have the opportunity to earn some depth reps in this room. But I was a guy that thought maybe before they got Smith Vilbert, this would be a guy that would probably would have to start for Carolina. It shows you the work that this staff did in the spring portal, going out and getting guys, that this is a guy that now can come in, can sort of ease into the system. And with 2 years remaining, he can be a contributor this year for Carolina, or, could wait until towards till the end of the season to really become more of a contributor and really just prepare for next year.
Yeah, it feels like with the 2 years left of eligibility, if he becomes a factor this year, great. I think the staff is gearing up for him to be a big part of what they do in 2026, which if they're thinking that way, that should probably be a good sign that Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi plan on being here next year, despite everyone and their mother telling you that these guys are only going to be in Chapel Hill for one season. So, you get him here, you get him acclimated to what you want to do. You get him in your weight program, your eating program, get that body right. And then by this time next year, we'll be talking about him being a guy that could maybe be a nice difference maker for that year's defensive line. So I'm not even going to try to say his name. He will be a guy that if he makes plays, and we have to talk about it on the podcast, I'm going coach mode. I'm not butchering that court. Yeah, I'm not going to butcher that kid's name. So if you don't know the depth chart, get to know it, because there might be a guy or two. I'm going numbers because I can't say names anymore.
Well, I mean, look, I think you will call him Milcart if that's what ends up happening.
Call him Milk Carton,
because I mean that's what his name is. Milcart Abu-Jauti is how I pronounce it. Now I could be wrong, and we could get a new pronunciation on that. See, what we need is, they don't have it yet, but we need to get to the point of the season where Jones has read out the names and they have the little ear next to it. Like, let's see if I can play one right now that has Jones right here. No, I don't think it's going to work.
Travion Green.
There you go. So he has one for Travion Green, a guy that was already on the roster. Hell, we were calling him Trevion Green. So Travion Green, a little more emphasis on the A there. We need those pronunciations for some of the new guys. So hopefully that's on the way. Hopefully Jones is working on that behind the scenes for us, because we could really use it for some of the guys, including the other, with the group of edge rushers that Carolina could be looking to have this year. I know you will definitely need it for Chinadu Onyegoro at the edge rusher spot, a true freshman, if he is to play this year. Also in that room, you've got Austin Alexander, who's a true freshman, and redshirt freshman Daniel Anderson, probably the guy that I think has the best chance to contribute out of that trio right there. Although you never know. Austin Alexander, former four-star coming out of high school, maybe he's a guy that factors in early, especially because he has some decent weight on him already. Came into Carolina at about 240 pounds. So I don't know if they would put more weight on him or less, or try to thin him down a little bit. But we'll have to wait and see. Again, it all depends on what this defensive front looks like. We have no idea what it looks like at this point, what type of scheme they're going to run in terms of the number of guys that will be down on that defensive front, number of edge rushers that they're going to have, who's going to play the specific edge rusher position. So we just have to wait and see on that front. Meanwhile, the deeper depth at the defensive tackle position, you've got Devin Ankrum, who is probably the guy to keep an eye on because of the fact that he was a guy that was with the team back in the spring. Then you have the late enrollees. I think the biggest one that you need to know is Nico Maggio, the guy that came over from Wake Forest, of course, after Dave Clawson ended up resigning his position. That freed up some of those guys in that recruiting class. Carolina took advantage of that. Maggio is probably the biggest name that took advantage of that and went to Carolina. So certainly a guy with plenty of physicality to his game, comes out of Buford High School down there in Buford, Georgia. Very prestigious program, and I think he could be one to keep an eye on. He'll also be in that room with fellow true freshman Trey Giddens, Kamarion Thomas, and Ladarian Williams. So that is a look at that unit. There are a couple of other guys that are still on the roster as well. Those guys are listed more as defensive ends, not quite edge rushers. That would be Emmanuel Nwayu. Then you've got Xavier Lewis, and also a guy that we talked about earlier. We mentioned his name with the running backs. Not sure where exactly he's going to play. That would be Henry Martello, a guy who in other years would have been a walk-on, but is with the team this year on scholarship. So that's your look at the defensive line, guys. Would love for any of you guys to leave your comments, what you think of the Tar Heels defensive line this year. I think overall, there are a lot of questions about this group. There's no doubt about that. I think Bryce Yates is the guy that you feel most comfortable with, but even him, you look at him and say, is he a guy that can really take it to the next level? The thing is, and this is my question to you, when we are sitting here at the end of the year, do you think that ultimately we are talking about a better defensive line than last year, or is it going to be much of the same that we're talking about from years past, mainly just because with some of these guys, they just don't have the experience?
I'll say it's better because I believe more, and not saying that I don't believe in the offensive staff. I think Carolina's going to be better defensively because of the Belichick effect. That's his area of specialty. I know that he wants to be involved on the offensive side and everything like that. But it's very rare you've seen a really bad Belichick coach defense. I mean, I can maybe count on 3 fingers how many times I've seen it happen. And there was one year he had the worst defense in the NFL, made the Super Bowl. I mean, that's how good this dude is. So I will say that it's better because I think they got the right blend of talent with some youth, with some inexperience, but that'll all be coached up. And I think the schedule plays a big part of it as well, where they're not going up against the best offensive lines that the sport has to offer week in, week out. So I'll say it's better, and then I think the conversation will be going into next year is how close this program is to getting back to where Butch Davis had built them up defensively, where that was a top 25 defense, year in, year out.
Yeah, I think early in the year, we will be having conversations about this defensive line and saying to ourselves, is this going to be much of the same? Because I don't know how good they're going to be right out of the gate. I think it's once you get to later in the season where you start to become more confident in this unit, some of these guys start to grow up, and I think they will be better at season's end. Now, do I think they're going to be one of the top defensive line units in the entire country? I do not. I think that's expecting a lot from this group. But I do think that they will be solid enough in front of this back seven, which we actually feel pretty decent about, that we will be having the conversation of how good they could be going into next year. So I think, they will have to replace Price Yates after the season is over. So that will definitely be something that will be on the mind. Same thing if Smith Vilbert plays a big role. But I do think that this is a unit, especially if both of those guys, the veterans in this room can really have strong seasons, then Carolina is going to have solid line play. I think the X factor is really, to me, it's what does Mims do in the middle of that defensive line? If he steps up, then I think you've got a chance to be really good. We've got to see. It's one of the things that I worry about the most. I think both sides of the football, the areas that you're worried about are in the trenches. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But there are some guys that really have some good upside in this room that I think could play out for Carolina this year. So that wraps it up for this edition of the show. The one thing that I did want to mention, they did have the video that came out earlier today. I did watch it. I wasn't sure if you were able to watch it before this edition of the show. So we pushed it back. And plus, with the Blaske stuff, that was a lot that I think we really needed to talk about right there at the start. We knew this was going to go long with the defensive line. So we will talk about the come up chapter 1, which, by the way, the thing that I'm kind of wondering with this, is this in place of the docuseries that we were supposed to get? Or are they just doing it on social media now and saying, screw the whole, what was it, Hulu that they were supposed to be with now? Because this seems a little weird to me that they released this out of nowhere. It's a 28-minute episode, and it's part 1 of what is expected to be a look at training camp. I don't really know what else they could show in a docuseries unless they're going to follow the team during the season on Hulu. So this might be it. But we'll talk about that on the next edition of the podcast along with the linebackers. So make sure that you guys tune in for that. Here on these same channels, whether you're on the YouTube channel, which we are pushing, guys, make sure you go over to the YouTube channel. I'll throw up the banner so that you guys can see it. Make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel for us. We would greatly appreciate it. Plenty of great content that's going to be coming out there. We're going to break down the breakdowns that we have done along all of these units, the offensive line unit. I'm going to have a bunch of breakdowns that I'll be putting up tomorrow. So that episode will be broken down, and we'll do the exact same with this edition of the podcast. So if you want to go back and hear just about specific guys, if you want to go back and hear about Daniel King, just because you want to know who is coming in to take over for Austin Blaske, if you want to hear a little bit about Chad Lindbergh, we'll have those breakdowns up there for you guys so that you can check those out. So make sure you're checking out our YouTube page. We've got the shorts and everything too that give you just a little bit of our opinions on certain topics. Then, it will promote for you to go to the episode to be able to listen to it. So there's so much great content that we're putting out on there. Make sure you check that out. Also, guys, head over to the Twitter page at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter. Make sure you follow, turn on post notifications. And when you do, all of our articles, our podcast, whenever we go live and I retweet it, and if we put up any additions of the podcast afterwards, all of that stuff will go straight to your feed. That's the only thing that we post on there are articles and podcast editions. So make sure that you guys are keeping up with that. It's the best way to keep up with all of the Heel Tough Blog content that we have going out each and every day. Also, go over to the Facebook page, give it a like. We'd greatly appreciate that as well. I know a lot of you guys are watching on Facebook, and we appreciate that. So help us out there if you can. Last thing to promote is, of course, the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We're almost done with the position previews on there. Special teams is the only other one that I'm going to put up. I will put that one up tomorrow for you guys so that you can get a look at that, because tonight, just a little bit too late, but we want you guys to check out the special teams. And again, those are the perfect things to read to sort of get you prepared for these editions of the podcast where we'll go a little more in depth. Josh gives his opinion on them. So make sure that you guys go back and read those for us. We would greatly appreciate that. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, Go Tar Heels!